Have you ever felt like God was trying to get your attention, but you just weren't exactly sure how to recognize it? Or, maybe you've wondered why some people seem to pick up on divine guidance so much more clearly than others? Well, today we're exploring a really fascinating text that lays out a highly structured framework for recognizing that kind of guidance right in the middle of your everyday life. Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to be your guide today as we unpack this source material together. We're going to do a structured, neutral breakdown of a text that approaches spiritual awareness in a totally unique way. See, it treats spiritual sensitivity not as some rare, mystical superpower reserved just for prophets or pastors, but actually as a practical, everyday discipline, something that literally anyone can develop. Okay, let's dive right into this. We've grouped the source material's 10 steps into 5 clear phases for you. First, defining true spiritual sensitivity. Second, escaping the modern noise. Third, building a solid foundation. Fourth, guarding your inner heart. And finally, the ultimate relational goal. All right, starting off with Section 1, defining true spiritual sensitivity. Right out of the gate, our source text fundamentally redefines this whole concept by stripping away a lot of common misconceptions. It defines spiritual sensitivity as the everyday ability to recognize God's presence, respond to his leading, and become aware of spiritual realities rather than just constantly experiencing visions or dreams. So the really crucial point here is that the text actively moves this concept away from the purely mystical. Sure, it acknowledges that extraordinary experiences can happen, but it insists that true sensitivity is really about simpler, everyday awareness, and that makes it completely accessible to every single believer. To help us wrap our heads around this, the author provides a brilliant metaphor. They say it's like developing your hearing to recognize a familiar voice. Think of it kind of like tuning an instrument. If you're standing in a crowded, noisy room, you can still easily pick out the voice of a close friend, right? Because you know it so well. Well, the text argues that the more time you spend with God, the more familiar his ways become, which makes it so much easier to recognize his guidance in your day-to-day life. Moving right along to Section 2, escaping the modern noise. Now, before you can build up this sensitivity, the text points out a major roadblock. And what's really interesting about this slide is this exact quote from the author. Sometimes the issue is not that God is silent. The issue is that life is loud. Man, doesn't that hit the nail on the head? The text identifies our modern environment, the endless notifications, the jam-packed schedules, nonstop information, as the primary obstacle here. It argues that a lot of us are so busy just reacting to life that we never actually pause to reflect. So to develop this sensitivity, you literally have to intentionally create space and stillness. Which brings us to Section 3, building a solid foundation. Let's walk through these 3 foundational steps from the text. Step 1 is consistent prayer, but notice how it emphasizes listening just as much as speaking. It's a two-way street designed to align your heart. Then, step 2 is scripture. This acts as the absolute bedrock for discernment. The text actually warns that without biblical truth grounding you, it's super easy to mistake your own assumptions for divine guidance. And finally, step 3 is obedience. This simply means you have to act on the guidance God has already provided. So this whole framework demands both an active relationship through prayer and study and a very practical, physical response in your daily choices. And that leads perfectly into a core thesis of the entire text. Sensitivity grows through response. The author makes a really fascinating point here. A lot of people are out there asking for a new direction or new revelation while completely ignoring the steps that are already sitting right in front of them. The basic idea is that the faster you act on those everyday prompts, whether that's a little nudge toward kindness, forgiveness, or generosity, the clearer the spiritual leading actually becomes moving forward. Let's transition into Section 4, guarding your inner heart. According to the source, this phase is where you really need to do an internal audit. Why? Because negative internal filters will violently distort your understanding. Things like bitterness, pride, unforgiveness, and fear, they basically act like a dirty camera lens. They cloud your judgment and create a ton of internal resistance. The text makes it clear that no matter how much you pray, if your heart is full of pride or bitterness, your ability to discern clearly is going to be severely compromised. And this brilliantly illustrates a major tension the author highlights about our internal state, the stark difference between emotion and conviction. See, emotions are temporary, they're highly intense, and honestly, they can be completely misleading. Conviction, on the other hand, represents a lasting truth that's grounded in wisdom and peace. The text warns that a lot of folks confuse emotional intensity with spiritual sensitivity. It stresses that true guidance requires us to evaluate our experiences through the lens of truth, not just our fleeting feelings. So, to help figure out if you're being led by genuine conviction or just misleading emotion, the text offers a sort of litmus test. I want to directly challenge you to apply this to your own life for a second. What kind of fruit is your spiritual influence producing? Is it resulting in greater love, peace, and humility? Or is it creating confusion, division, and pride? The framework insists that healthy spiritual growth is always going to produce healthy, observable outcomes. Basically, a tree is known by its fruit. Let's move to the next part and see how this builds over time. The ninth step of our source material emphasizes being really patient with the process. In a world that constantly demands instant spiritual maturity, the text reminds us that real growth is gradual. Over days, you're just planting simple habits of prayer and scripture. Over months, you build repeated experiences of trust and obedience. And over years, well, that culminates in steady growth and natural discernment. God often works quietly before he works visibly, so patience is absolutely key here. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the ultimate relational goal. Literally everything we've discussed so far drives toward one overarching takeaway from the text: relationship always matters more than experiences. The author strongly emphasizes that the goal isn't chasing spectacular signs, trying to unlock hidden secrets, or racking up these extraordinary encounters. The ultimate goal of this entire framework is simply to know God. The text states that when your focus remains steadily on that relationship, the wisdom, the discernment, and the sensitivity, they all develop entirely naturally as a byproduct. Which leaves us with one final, provocative question based on the framework we've just explored together. Are you chasing an extraordinary experience, or are you genuinely seeking a deeper relationship? It's a really powerful thought to reflect on, and it perfectly encapsulates the entire message of our source text. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope breaking this down helped clarify this fascinating framework for you, and I can't wait to explore our next topic together. Until then, keep learning and keep growing.